Assalamu alaikum, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whichever part of the world you are in. My name is Yusuf Ismail. I'm your host and founder of the South African Debate Initiative. And I'm with my brother again, who is unfortunately once again in the background. He's had some other scheduled appointments and engagements. Brother Muhammad from Coventry Faith Foundation. It's important that you subscribe to both our channels, the Coventry Faith Foundation in the United Kingdom, as well as the South African Debate Initiative. As we've been documenting this genocide that's been going on, and it is a genocide. Nobody has basically been able to challenge us, refute us, and overcome us, or even debate us for that particular matter. We've had people who have tried. They've tried to debate both myself and Brother Muhammad, but they haven't succeeded. And so relentlessly and incessantly, we've been discussing the genocidal, maniacal, satanic state, which is the Israeli regime, over the past year, now moving into 2025. We've commenced at the end of 2023 when I partnered with my good brother Muhammad, and now we're in 2025. And the question today is, who do you think won the war? Who actually won the war? Now, there's been many discussions out there by individuals, by people, by, in fact, even 972 magazine, that this new agreement may, in fact, reduce the intensity of Israel's killing spree, but it is likely to usher in a kind of a grueling new phase of ethnic cleansing with Trump's full support. Now, whilst that is it's not a comment made by me, even magazines like 972 magazine, Ynet, the Yidioth Aronot has basically made that particular point. And indeed, many Western journalists have, in fact, come to the conclusion. The point is, who has won the war at the end of the day? I think there's no doubt that Israel has lost. Israel has lost. They've succeeded, of course, in killing babies, mass murdering families, destroying infrastructure, destroying the environment, destroying people's lives, destroying schools, destroying hospitals, destroying generation upon generation of individuals, all in the so-called purported name of wanting to get rid of Hamas. And in the end, we could clearly see on the streets of Gaza, the Al-Qassam brigades are there, powerful, full, ready, and waiting. Abu Ubaidah is there. Sinwar may be dead, Ismail Haniya may be dead, but Hamas and certainly the Palestinian resistance is still existing and ready to fight Israel to the hilt. So where have they succeeded? The aim has always been that they were going to get rid of Hamas, that they were going to basically get all the hostages back. Now what we've realized, they've killed more hostages during their genocidal campaign than saving them. And now they're back to the table whereby they're negotiating the release of the hostages. But this is what Hamas, in fact, offered from day one. Hamas offered the release of the hostages from day one, and Israel refused point blank. So at the end of the day, Israel has lost. Israel has lost the moral battle. Israel has lost the physical battle against the Al-Qassam brigades. And you can't call massacre and genocide a win. When Rwanda engaged in its genocidal campaign in 1994, nobody stated that they won, or that the Tutsis won, or the Hutus won. Nobody said that. When Nazi Germany engaged in its genocidal campaign, nobody made the claim that Nazi Germany won. When Pol Pot engaged in its genocidal campaign via the establishment of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, what John Pilger famously calls Year Zero, nobody claims that Pol Pot and his killing death squads won. When the United States dropped the nuclear bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, nobody claimed they won. When they attacked and decimated Afghanistan, did they win in the end? The Taliban's back in power. When they basically decimated and destroyed Iraq, did they win? Well, we got the rise of another creature by the name of ISIS. So in Israel's situation, the situation is so far out there that, number one, they've lost against Hamas. And so I'm not just saying it. The far right members of the Knesset are making this particular point, that Israel has essentially lost, and they're against this particular ceasefire agreement. Whilst the agreement, on the one hand, may reduce the intensity of Israel's killing spree, it still, however, is going to usher a new phase of ethnic cleansing. So the point is that the ceasefire, I think we need to also take that into cognizance, won't stop Israel's genocidal agenda. Now, what's the background in relation to this? What we had over the past couple of days, maybe a week ago, was that you had an individual by the name of Stephen Woodcock. He was Donald Trump's incoming Middle East envoy. The story goes is that he didn't report or bother with any kind of pleasantries, and he informed the Israelis that he would be arriving and meeting with Netanyahu on a Saturday. When he visited, it coincided with the Sabbath, the Shabbat, meaning that the prime minister would be unavailable. But Woodcock made it clear that the Jewish schedule holiday would not interfere with his schedule. And so Netanyahu, understanding the stakes, went to his office that afternoon to meet the envoy, who subsequently then went to Qatar to press further on with the ceasefire deal. We don't know the details of that conversation. We don't know what happened. And I'm not saying that Trump is in any way a friend of the Palestinians. But what is quite clear is that this character called Woodcock, I don't know what hold he had on Netanyahu, he managed to move Netanyahu more in a single meeting than the entire Biden administration did in over 15 months. And so following that meeting, last week on January 15th, which would have been a Wednesday, Israel and Hamas then agreed to a multi-phase, meaning it's going to be the first phase, second phase, ceasefire deal that would see Israeli hostages exchanged for Palestinian prisoners and captives, along with an eventual full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Now, it's too early to tell if this particular agreement would hold. And Israel's long tradition, they've got a whole decades-long tradition of violating ceasefires, and there are demands being made by Israeli ministers to continue the genocide. And that essentially gives us some sort of reason to be skeptical. But for the time being, this truce has brought an indescribable amount of relief to millions in Gaza who have faced a campaign of annihilation and massacre for more than a year. And so, if the ceasefire in Gaza does hold, it does actually hold in relation to what is basically happening, then from that perspective, it would effectively mean that Israel has essentially lost. They haven't achieved anything that they wanted to achieve. They wanted to get rid of Hamas, they failed. Hamas is stronger than ever. They wanted to get the hostages. Well, they failed in that too, because a significant number of the hostages have been killed, murdered. Murdered by who? Murdered by Israel, not murdered by Hamas. Those hostages that have been released, and we've seen images and pictures of them being released, have been in good medical condition. They've been in good health. There's been no evidence of them being raped, no evidence of them being slaughtered or tortured or butchered. They are in far more better shape than the thousands of Palestinian hostages being kept in Israeli dungeons. Now, one of the hostages that the Palestinians did want was Marwan Barghouti. And certainly Barghouti has been described as a Palestinian Nelson Mandela. However, one of the individuals or groups that had opposed his release was, not surprisingly, the Israeli bulldog known as the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And no surprises there, because Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, is nothing more than a puppet. He's nothing more than an individual that does the bidding of Israel. He's an eccentric 89-year-old senile old man that can do nothing, can say nothing. And certainly Barghouti comes from a faction which is related to Fatah, and if he's there, he'll certainly give the Palestinian Authority and its present leadership a run for their money. And so, not surprisingly, they don't want him there. The Palestinian Authority doesn't want him there. Biden has clearly shown us that he'll forever be known, this imbecilic, senile old man, also eccentric, also suffering from dementia, will forever be known as Genocide Joe. He was blinded by his commitment to this so-called mythic Zionism that purely exists only in his own imagination. And he was unwilling to see how this genocide was so obscene, so pathetic, so morally grotesque, so unjustifiable, and not only detrimental to the Israeli interests in the region, but also the American interests in the region. And in many ways, Israel's genocide in Gaza and its campaign of regional destabilization and decimation of the entire area became the Biden administration's own war. Trump, on the other hand, also, let's not forget, he's a maniac. He's a narcissistic fool. I've seen his so-called interactions with Netanyahu. Both of them are psychopaths. And so it's quite clear that one psychopath doesn't like the other psychopath. And I don't think Trump personally, they both basically are narcissistic in their own right. So I don't think he is too fond of Netanyahu himself. But he also operates with the same kind of ideological constraints. But from his perspective, he's far more concerned as a sociopath and as a businessman, what he can gain from this relationship. So let's put it in this particular perspective. As many people have pointed out, Trump sought a ceasefire deal, and people ask, why do you think he sought this? Not that he was concerned about the Palestinians or about human rights or about the fact that Israel was engaging in its genocide. For all intents and purposes, he wouldn't care. He'd let the entire Palestinian population be put in gas chambers if he had its way. But he sought the ceasefire deal because it would serve as a massive PR campaign for him. And then he would be able to brag, as he's now doing. He's now basically bragging that he's essentially solved the problem that Genocide Joe never could. And so in the given circumstances, what you now have is he basically would like to broker other deals. Like, for example, they want a normalization agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That's been his intent from day one. In 2017, Trump he had met King Salman, the father of this nutcase MBS, Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. They signed a joint strategic vision agreement. I mean, King Salman himself apparently appears to be senile, so he's given the running of the kingdom to his son. But for him, for Donald Trump, the ceasefire wasn't a matter of principle or morality. It's a transactional engagement. So Biden was happy to let Israel's genocide continue unimpeded, regardless of whether it impacted on U.S. and regional interests. Trump was determined to remove potential obstacles standing in the way of his broader agenda. And that's why what you see, the difference that is happening here. So we shouldn't give Trump credit for this. This is the point. People are now assuming that Donald Trump should be given credit for the ceasefire agreement that his man Woodcock apparently over an afternoon, on a Sabbath afternoon, brokered with Netanyahu. We don't know the nature and the details of that conversation. And little changed when it came to the leverage that he was willing to use to influence the conduct of Israel, because Trump never threatened to condition military aid to Israel. If, for example, Trump stated, if you continue this genocide, we're going to stop armaments sales to Israel. Or maybe we would have then woken up and said, look, there's something happening here. This is now somebody that means business. And also, he didn't indicate that he was going to basically accept and ratify the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants against Netanyahu, nor did he give any indication that he was going to support the South African government's phenomenal legal team's application at the International Court of Justice to hold Israel accountable for having committed genocide. None of that. He's not going to do that. So we shouldn't give him credit for this. Think about it. We shouldn't give him credit. His role in this was purely transactional. Let's not forget that his son-in-law, what's his name? I think Jared. his son-in-law, spoke during the heights of the genocide in wanting to establish settlements in the Gaza Strip. That's his son-in-law. Himself, over the past year, did not make a single statement condemning the Israeli genocide. So Trump isn't a friend. He's not a friend. What happened in the given circumstances is that it's quite clear that Trump didn't want this to impact his inauguration and, of course, his own particular agenda. And he saw that this continuous genocide, obviously, I believe he would have known this is a genocide, but he won't publicly come and say this. But he basically saw this as a nail in his heel, a nail in his heel. There are some issues is that that are of concern at this particular point. If you look at the Israeli media, Ynet has reported this, plus 972 magazine has reported this as well. They've stated that the ceasefire agreement that was brokered, and if Netanyahu agreed to it, came along with a long list of goodies and treats. Some of the goodies are that Israel, for example, they've got a spyware called Pegasus. There were going to be talks about lifting sanctions on the Israeli spyware known as Pegasus. There is talk about lifting sanctions on the violent Israeli settlers, meaning that Washington will be giving blessing to these scoundrels on the West Bank that are engaging in outright theft of land, Israeli Palestinian land, and outright annexation. And the talk is that also they are giving leverage to the idea possibly that there may be a facilitation of a direct attack on Iran by Israel. So the issue is that whilst a ceasefire is in fact illustrating that, and this was clearly coerced by the United States, that this illustrates that this is basically a win for Hamas and not Israel. At the same time, we need to know and we need to realize that the ceasefire is not what we're looking for. We are calling for the total and utter disbandment and elimination of the Israeli state. Nothing less, nothing more. Nothing less, nothing more in the given circumstances. So in the 8 months since Israel first rejected an almost identical deal to which Hamas had agreed in principle, after its army had simply sit back? Are we to basically just allow that the ceasefire is sufficient? What are we to do? What are we to do in the given circumstances? We need to basically think and be more pragmatic in our approach. We need to be more circumspect. We need to basically ensure that sorry, I lost my camera there, that we don't get bought into this talk that, look, the ceasefire is the end goal. We need more than just simply a ceasefire. We need the total disbandment of the Israeli state. We need that totally and utterly, total and utter disbandment of the Israeli state, nothing less, nothing more. And people need to also realize that whilst there's been this talk of the ceasefire that has been supposedly taking place on the 19th of January. The ceasefire took place and apparently commenced, and the talk happened on Wednesday. But after that, immediately after that, 19 Palestinians were murdered. Hear this. 19 Palestinians were murdered as a result of Israeli attacks on both Rafah, on Khan Yunis, and elsewhere in the hours leading up to the ceasefire implementation, according to the civil defense in the Gaza Strip. Over more than 36 people were injured in the attacks which took place as displaced civilians began returning to their destroyed cities and to their destroyed neighborhoods. So you have a situation. I'm going to share this screen here from a news magazine called The Cradle, which has done phenomenal work over the past several months on covering the Israeli genocide. If we can share this, Brother Muhammad, can we share this on the screen? Can we share this? Yeah, here we are. So this is a Cradle article, and the Cradle basically ceasefire takes effect following Israeli delays and attacks. And we already told that when these people started returning to their homes and their destroyed cities, they were returning in joy. Imagine the resilience and the patience of the Palestinians. They were returning in joy. But as these people were returning to their cities, to their areas, to their land, to their houses, which are now totally obliterated, they were attacked. They were attacked by Israel. Here are the 3 female captives that were released by Al-Qassam brigades. If you look at X, this is the report on X, or otherwise known as Twitter. I don't know if you can see this on my screen. If I can basically just share this, if I can just share the screen here. I'm just going to share the Twitter feed so you can see it more clearly. Here's the Twitter feed. The military spokesman for Hamas Qassam brigades, Abu Ubaidah, well-known Abu Ubaidah, he says, within the framework of the Al-Aqsa flood for the prisoner exchange, the Qassam brigades decided to release today the following Zionist prisoners: Romi Ronen, 24 years old; Emily Damari, 28 years old; Doron Steinbrecher, 31 years old. And you see them being released, and they are released. They were there for now more than a year. They were in good shape. They were not raped. They were not abused. They were not basically sexually violated or sexually molested in any way, shape, or form. Nothing happened to them. Nothing, absolutely nothing happened to them. So my question is, in light of that, in light of this belies the false notion and the false allegations that Hamas involved themselves in rape of the Palestinian, of the Israeli soldiers or the Israeli citizens in any way, shape, or form. None of that has been proven to happen. Absolutely none. So this basically shows that we had been dealing with the Israeli Hasbara for several months, and all of that has been shown to be untrue. So these are the individuals amongst the few that have been released. We've seen them. We haven't had any problem in relation to their particular release. If I can share the balance of this particular screen here and continue with the Cradle article. Here we are. And Brother Mohammed, we can share the StreamYard link so that if people want to join us, they can join us. Share the StreamYard link on our page and certainly in the chat. And I think people can only enter the chat if they've got the StreamYard link. So if we can share the StreamYard link on the YouTube page as well as on the screen, if we can share the StreamYard link on the screen itself. So coming back to what we are saying, this was the early article from 972 magazine. I don't want to go there. I want to go to the StreamYard, the article that is basically there in the Cradle magazine. Let me just go there shortly. Here we are. So these are the individuals, the ladies, the girls that were released. The government media office in Gaza announced that thousands of police officers began deploying across the strip to maintain security and order. And video footages also showed the convoy of armed resistance fighters and security forces all being welcomed and cheered by Palestinians. Because the argument being made is that these resistance fighters and these security forces and Hamas are despised by the Palestinians. Nothing could be more further from the truth. Nothing could be more further than the truth. The Palestinians were lording over Hamas, basically celebrating them. They were the Al-Qassam brigades openly on the streets, and they were being cheered by the crowd. So much for the Palestinians so-called hating Hamas. Totally false. This is the Israeli army radio. This is from the Cradle. Whilst Israel continues to wait for the list of abductees and while Hamas continues to target Israel, these are the most important images to see right now from the Gaza Strip. Let them burn. Hamas terrorists in the pickup truck. Hamas terrorists in the pickup truck with green headbands, and Hamas policemen in Gaza police are redeploying throughout the Gaza Strip to the cheers of the crowds. This is basically what is happening. So from the perspective of the Israelis, they've lost. The Israelis have totally lost. Where's the win? Where on earth is the win for the Israelis? Let me share this and see some of the videos that are being shared on the streets of Gaza. This is what's happening on the streets of Gaza. Here we are. Let me share that. Let me go here and share this here. If you can see this on your screen, here are some of the videos, if they can be played.
انتشار كما وسط الصحافه والاعلاميين ان وزاره الداخليه والامن الوطني والشرطه الفلسطينيه المدير العام للشرطه الفلسطينيه حيث اعطت تعليماتها للجميع الانتشار وضبط الامن وملاحقه.
Here we are. There are other pictures. Here's some of the pictures. This is Al-Qassam brigades. Look at this on the streets of Gaza. And here, look at this. Openly on the streets of it. Do they look like they are weak? Yeah, yes, yeah, are members of Hamas, members of the Al-Qassam brigades, which Israel's army radio correspondent, Doron Kodosh, a correspondent for one of the radios, has pointed out that, look, from the Israeli military perspective, they've basically lost. Hamas, this is what he says, Hamas, which at no point in the war lost its control or hold on any part of the Gaza Strip, except for the areas that were completed, is now taking advantage of these hours to strengthen and consolidate its hold and rule over the Gazan citizens. So who won? Did Israel won? They've succeeded in murdering the Palestinian babies, children, women, civilian men, youth, destroying university schools. And then we've told Israel evacuated forces from Beit Hanun, from Jabalia, where we had the famous Jabalia refugee camp, which was where people were butchered and murdered and burnt alive in cold blood, from Beit Lahia, from central Rafah. And in the meantime, Hamas has redeployed and continues to control a large number of civilians. So a large number of civilians have been basically controlled by Israel. A large number of civilians. The bottom line is, even after a year and 3 months, Israel has not succeeded in dismantling Hamas. Not at all. They haven't dismantled Hamas. They haven't destroyed the Al-Qassam brigades. And they haven't been able to find an alternative government. What they have succeeded in is basically destroy an entire population and generations to come. But this is not a win. You can't view that as a win. This is not a win at all. It's not a win. It's basically the fact that in reality, from the Israelis' perspective, they didn't achieve what they set out to do. So this was a failure. Going out and killing people can never be viewed as a success at all in any shape or form. So that's what we basically have here. Israel, the Al-Qassam brigades are there, they're out, and they're fully available. Nobody can claim now that Israel has won. Nobody can make that claim that Israel has won. So I do believe we have Brother Anam, the good Brother Anam that's on. Brother Anam, join us.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Welcome. Walaikum salam, brother Anam. How do you do?
I'm doing pretty good, brother. It's nice to have a ceasefire. It's better than to have nonstop atrocities and bombings.
Hmm. Indeed, and now, of course, the thing is that from the perspective of Israel, they haven't achieved what they wanted to basically go out and do, and so, I mean, from their perspective, this is basically a failure. Um, uh, you know, because I just see in the comments by the Zionist leader, one of the finance minister Smotrich, the famous Smotrich, and even Ben Gavir.
Yeah.
They've demanded guarantees that the war should resume. Because as it stands now, Gaza is totally destroyed. It's totally broken. It's uninhabitable. But I just want to point out what Smotrich has basically stated. Look at what he says. I just want to share this. This is again on X, the feed on X. I haven't logged in, but I want to share this with you, Brother Anam, just to see whilst we can probably discuss the screenshot here from X, which is Twitter. This is Israel's finance minister. Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich. You can see that Gaza is destroyed and broken and uninhabitable, totally uninhabitable, if you can see this. And it will remain so. It will remain so. It will remain so. Do not be impressed by false cries of joy of our enemies. He's describing the Palestinians. This is an animalistic society which sanctifies death and dances on the ruins of its life. Very soon we will erase their smile again and replace it with cries of grief and the wails of those who are left with nothing. This is Bezalel Smotrich, published by Dropsite News. And while Smotrich opposed the ceasefire deal and voted against it in the Security Cabinet session, he insisted it does not signify the end of the war. Following discussion with Netanyahu, a clause was added to the cabinet resolution stipulating that Israel will resume military operations with full force, occupy the entire Gaza Strip, and take control of humanitarian aid, what Smotrich describes as the, what does he say here, the Hamas's oxygen pipeline. And he's basically, so you've got people within the cabinet that are clearly not happy with the deal, that sustained Netanyahu now for more than a year, that kept him out of prison, that actually, in their own words, want to wipe out the smile of the Gazans and leave Gaza totally disintegrated and uninhabitable. And so essentially, this basically means that for a lot of the people within the Knesset, they want it as business as usual. They don't want a ceasefire. They want never-ending destruction. So this is a kind of the real animals. The real animalistic group is basically somebody that is an individual that that is supporting this. Now we've got someone in the stream, and you've dealt with this channel for a long time, and you've been very respectful, even though we've disagreed. We've got someone called Muslim for Israel. Bring this character on called Muslim for Israel. Is he there? Is he on this? Is he on the channel? Bring him on. Bring this chap called Muslim for Israel. Muslim for Israel, are you here? You here? Muslim for Israel, he's muted. Can you talk? You want to say something?
You have to unmute yourself, brother.
You have to unmute yourself because you're either barking to yourself or you have to unmute yourself. Muslim for Israel, are you there? Others will have to kick you out of the stream. Unmute yourself. We're giving you the opportunity to come and defend Israel. Others, we have to kick you off. Okay, he's wasting our time. Kick him off, Brother Mohammed. We don't need him. If you want to come on the stream, I don't know what the significance is. Either come and join and contribute, alternatively, and of course, we've allowed you to come in without you showing your face. So, and you basically came in, you either abuse us, or alternatively, you remain silent, so we can't continue the discussion with you. But anyway, and any thoughts from your side? Any thoughts from your perspective?
I'm glad because, the title of the stream is Who Won? And then what you just read shows that, if we're back here in 2 years' time or 1 year time, did you watch the last briefing of the Secretary of State of Biden's?
Blinken.
Yeah,
The
Blinken.
latest briefing by Blinken, the media,
Yeah.
not the latest one. I don't know which one.
The one where they had to throw the guy out. Yeah, but then
Max Blumenthal. Are you talking about the one with Max Blumenthal? Let me just get that.
I didn't see Blumenthal, but I saw there. Was that Blumenthal being thrown out? Because he's a right wing.
I don't know. I'm just gonna let me just open that so we know what we're discussing. Let me just see Max Blumenthal, and I just want to see, was it with Blinken? I don't know if it was Blumenthal. I think it was Blumenthal. Let me just let me open it, and I want to see.
I'm talking about the State Department press conference.
Here's the one. I think this is the one. Hold on a second. I just want to open it and share this. Hold on a second. So let me get the because Blumenthal has been Blumenthal has been quite regular in these press briefings in the past, and I don't know if he was kicked up. Let me just share this. It's a 59-second clip. I don't know if this is what you are referring to. Hold on a second. I just want to share this. Where are we? Yeah. Let me just try and get this.
I think the name of that journalist, Sam Husseini, maybe they wrote that in the.
It's possible Sam was saying, "Why aren't you in The Hague?" It's probably that. But let me just share this. This maybe. Let me just get you. I just want to put this share screen. Hold on a second, and share screen, and then we'll play this for a few seconds. Shock moment. Where are we? Okay, here we are. I'm just going to expand this.
Thank you, chat.
Yeah.
300 reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal in May? We all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony. You kept the bombs flowing.
I'm happy to
Why did you?
That's Max Blumenthal. I think that sounds like Max Blumenthal. Let me just see what happens here.
Sacrifice the rules-based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zion.
They threw him out too.
Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you allow my friends' homes in Gaza to be destroyed when we had a deal in May? You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating with fascism. You waved the white flag before Netanyahu.
He says he's Jewish.
You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
We'll have the time to take questions at the end.
Father-in-law
Is that Blumenthal? I think it's Blumenthal.
My grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel?
Yeah, that's Max Blumenthal.
The Holocaust of our time to happen.
Thank
How
you
does
very
it
much.
feel to have your legacy be genocide? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt. You smirk through the whole thing every day. You smirk through the genocide.
Yeah, that's Max Blumenthal. But I think there's another video you are referring to. If it's this video here, let me just try and get this. This is far more. This is on CNN. So let me just share this. This was on CNN. Hold on a second. I'm just going to share this from CNN, and then I think we can probably chat about this. If this is the one you're looking for, I don't know if this is the first one was at Blumenthal. This is where a group of protesters. I think this is about 4 days ago.
Secretary Blinken taking questions on Israel, Hamas, that deal. But as you heard, he was repeatedly interrupted by some cringeworthy heckling by activists, which is highly unusual in a situation like this. Let's listen to that as he was thanking the press in the beginning of his comments.
Not always the most enjoyable thing, but it is the most necessary thing in our democracy.
Reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing?
That's Blumenthal. We heard
I'm
that.
happy to address questions.
We had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony. You kept the bombs flowing.
I'm happy to address questions when we get a chance.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank
it is very upsetting. We could have stopped this in May. It's the same deal that we had in May.
I'm happy to address your questions when we get to questions. Thank you. Thank you.
You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating.
Yeah, I have a statement. Yeah, I have a statement to make. Thank you.
You waved the white flag before Netanyahu. You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
I look forward to taking questions when I get a chance to finish my statement. Thank you.
All right, so that's what happened as this press conference started. I'm going to bring you in, Alex. I mean,
And
we
then
were both sitting
there's
here
more
pretty
discussion.
stunned,
Then I
frankly.
think this is the one. This is the one.
Is the enlargement of those Abraham Accords.
And we have, I think, video of another angle of what happened there in the press room that's at the State Department. Let's watch.
About Israel's nuclear weapons, everybody from the ICJ. I was sitting here quietly, and now I'm being manhandled by 2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I'm asking questions. Wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders.
Please respect the process.
Oh, respect the process. Respect the process. Well, everybody from Amnesty International. From Amnesty International to the ICJ saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process. Criminal, why aren't you in The Hague? Why aren't you in The Hague? Why aren't you about Israel?
Wow.
So I can't speak to who that was. What I will say is that, over the past few years, whether it's the Pentagon, Indian journalists who have the opportunity to go to the State Department, to go to the White House and to ask.
So that's so much for press freedom. I don't know if you were referring to these videos here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one was black. I think Sam Husseini. That's a guy. Sam, the guy who was kicked out and dragged out right now. The one that we saw was the journalist Sam Husseini. Max Blumenthal. He was the guy in the first video, and I think also in the second video. But it's quite clear that when it comes to press freedom and challenging the United States government and the establishment, they're quite selective. They don't have a free press in the broader sense. It's like Noam Chomsky's manufacturing consent. So you wanted to say something about this?
Yeah. I actually watched the whole press conference.
I didn't watch the entire. I saw a couple of clips here and there. I read about this, but I didn't watch the entire conference. No.
So both of them, they could have asked those questions at the end, and I really wish they did. So when they finally did get to question and answer time, I really loved the first question because some of these reporters have been around for 2 decades or more. And so the first question was, around the same time, January 2009, Israel was bombing Gaza. Bush was leaving office, Obama was coming into office. And really, Israel thought, so in other words, brother, if we find ourselves here in 2 years again, I don't think this is any kind of, I would agree. I'm glad the last thing that you said before I jumped on was that this really isn't a victory. And bringing up the Smotrich Code too, it's like, so my goal, is actually the same thing, brother. It's like we have to arrive at a peace agreement, sign something right now, West Bank and Gaza, in return for, they could have Israel proper. And let's sign this peace agreement right now because
why not a single state? Why just not a single state? That would cut all the garbage out because then you could have a situation where Israel could basically, Israelis could then move into Gaza and the West Bank and stay there, at least in land that they would have to legitimately acquire, and vice versa. The West Bank occupants, the Palestinians and the Gazans can go into Israel. It's now that would be the ideal situation. So why can't they accept that? Because then people talk about democracy. It's not an Islamic state. It's not a Jewish dictatorship or theocracy. It's now democracy. Now it's a real democracy. It's like, because I see Gaza and the West Bank as the Bantustans, which we had in South Africa.
Yeah.
The Bantustans were under occupation. Of course, the situation is slightly different, but similar in many respects.
Right.
And of course, we've got a lot of challenges here, but the point is I would deal with the challenges and accept the one man, one vote than just total, utter imprisonment. So don't you think that a better call would be, because a lot of people like Rashid Khalidi, you've heard him, and Muin Rabbani, these guys are experts and quite moderate in their positions they adopt. And they make the argument, like Khalidi was part and parcel of, I think, with Oslo. He never met Clinton, but he was part of that whole negotiating process. And they stating that the two-state solution is, that door is shut. The door has long been shut. It's not even practical to have a two-state solution.
It's arguable if it could have ever worked in the first place. But here's the thing.
I doubt it would have.
Right? Right. But here's the thing, right? Like we have 2 nations on this soil. And right now, the animosity, the acrimony, because, we have other guests. So I wanted to make just 3 points, because I did write them down, brother. So I think something, because here's where we're at. We have two nations, and there's a speech that I remember Moshe Dayan. I tried to bring this up before, and you were telling me who Moshe Dayan was, right? But Moshe Dayan once made a speech of an Israeli soldier, and he says there's 100,000 eyes in Gaza that are praying for our deaths right now. You know, like, so the thing is that right now the hate, the you know. Forgiveness is something very hard for two people to overcome. I'm telling you, even right now, I was watching between India and Pakistan. There's so much a hostility, even though there hasn't been a war in, like, since the 60s or 70s. So, brother, the second thing is that you may say that, for example, being a Zionist, that's normal Finkelstein's position as well, right? Is that, like, Israel exists and that they basically have a right to their Israel proper. And so their job, he feels his job as an Israeli or an American Jew, is to get Israel to give the state of Palestine to the Palestinians, and you can have two kind of co-equal things, but that's your side and that's my side. So I just feel, because the hatred is so much, that's a little bit better right now. But I like your idea, brother.
But where does the hatred come from? Because the Palestinians have always been the ones that have been making major compromises. I mean, if there is some degree of hatred now amongst them,
pardon me, brother. Let me if I could. Yes, I want to go right to what you said. No, I don't mean to interrupt you. So, because we were talking about South Africa and Bantustans. At the time, 2000, however much I knew as a 14-year-old kid, I opposed Oslo, the Camp David too, at the between Arafat and Ehud Barak, because that would effectively create Bantustans. Like, Israel controls most of the territory and the Palestinians have just the population areas, and that's it. But the prison, prison is controlled by prison guards. Like 1% of the prison is controlled by the prison guards, and the prisoners control 90% of it. But that doesn't mean that they're in charge of the prison. So but do you feel, right? Because now looking back, and then I'll jump off because you have other guests and I'm always on here. So do you feel, at least if we signed it in 2000, as bad as it was, as South Africa apartheid it was, and it's basically an Israeli garbage collector scheme, do you think that would be better than what we have today? Because Gaza's rubble right now. I feel like I'd signed the Oslo in 2000 at this point.
I think you can't look at it anachronistically. And the problem with that is that, firstly, in 2000, nobody would have predicted that what would have happened in 2023 and 2024 and 2025 would have been even worse than because what we see, I don't think you can deny that what we've seen this year has been worse than the Nakba. In many respects, it's been worse than the Nakba of 1948. And I don't think in 2000 anyone would have predicted that. So in retrospect, if you were to go back to the agreements of 2000, one of the caveats in relation to and I want to have this conversation. I don't know who's on the backstage, but one of the caveats were that there's that famous video. I don't know if you're familiar with that famous video of Netanyahu, where at that stage he says he fooled everybody and that the settlements would basically increase. Are you familiar with that? That at the time in 2000, Netanyahu, there's a video where he's basically stating that that essentially that entire thing was a con. The entire aspect was a total con, and their aim in the long term was to get the Palestinians, to compromise. But in fact, they were going to increase the settlement, the annexations would increase, and so on and so forth. I mean, this buys into the myth. This is the problem, and I think people need to know this. This buys into the myth. Number one, there's three myths. The three myths are that, number one, I don't know back then, but at least now, that number one, the first myth is that the Palestinian Authority represented or did represent the will of the Palestinian people. I would say possibly Arafat at some point did. And I would say he's far more, I would consider him a far superior person morally to Abu Mazen. But I mean, he had his own flaws. That's the first point, the first myth. The second myth was that Israel always wants peace. And the third myth is that it's the Arabs that have essentially compromised every time they were basically given an opportunity, a peace deal, and so on and so forth. They've essentially scuttled it. They totally scuttled it. Now you're aware of that, Anam, as you know that is false. That is totally false.
I remember even in like 20 Saudi Arabia had proposed, look, let's do a regional settlement, free trade, just give the Palestinians their land, West Bank and Gaza, and that's it. And Israel didn't even consider it. But yeah.
And so the point being made is that
I agree.
For Israel,
let me agree with you. Let me give you one line to agree with you, and I can let you. Ali Abu Mina, right? And remember,
I know Ali Abu Mina. In fact, we're going to have him on the show.
Please.
But he's been he's caught up. He's caught up on he's got his own podcast he does with what's her name? I forget her name. He does it with this famous British journalist Asa Winstanley. It's Ali Abu Nima, and he's got Nora Barrow Friedman. They do phenomenal on the Electronic Intifada. But you're going on. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, ever since, like I said, I was 14 years old, they have been the best. It was in the height of the Intifada around 2000, 2003, and it was the best source for news because mainstream news would not be covering the Intifada. And the Electronic Intifada was how you used internet to activate for Palestine. And he was an earth-shattering guy, for me, personally speaking. But also, as long as I'm dropping names for the audience to read, I've read basically all of Edward Said's books and Christopher Hitchens at the time when he was collaborating with Edward Said on advocating for Palestine before Iraq War. Really good stuff. So, he wrote an article right after October 7th, and he says that Israel is going to have, post October 7th, whatever decisions we're going through, this is a result of every single decision Israel has made since 1967. And that is 100% true. When you think about actions have consequences, probably since 48 too. But, there's an intransigence on the Israeli side, and we're all suffering because of it. So let me agree with you there, brother.
Yeah, and there's a quote I've got here. I just looked it up on this quote here, and I've got it in one of the. I can't show I don't know if I can show the PDF. David Ben Gurion, I think he's quoted by Nahum Goldman. There's a book called The Jewish Paradox, and I've got the quote. I think I may have the book on PDF on one of my other files. And this quote seems to be it seems to be authentic because it's quoted by Goldman in the book, quoting Ben Gurion. Gurion says, "If I were an Arab leader, I would never sign an agreement with Israel. We have taken their country. It is true that God promised it to us, but how could that be? How could that interest them? Our God is not theirs. There has been anti-Semitism, the Nazis, Hitler, Auschwitz. But was that their fault? They see but one thing. We have come and we have stolen their country. Why would they accept that?" And that was Ben Gurion. And then you have another quote in relation to this so-called partnership deals by, in the Maariv, I think a newspaper on the 2nd of November 1973 by General Yehoshaphat Harkabi. He says that, in terms of agreements and so on, and since we are dealing with an agreement right now, the ceasefire agreement, but why I'm quoting this is that it kind of it underpins the ideology behind whatever Israel stands for. I'm not just talking about Netanyahu, but the Israeli psyche in terms of its position as has been historically via agreements. And this is what he says. He says we must define our position and lay down basic principles for a settlement or an agreement. Our demands should be moderate and balanced and appear to be reasonable. But in fact, they must involve such conditions as to ensure that the enemy rejects them. Then we should maneuver and allow him to define his own position and reject a settlement on the basis of a compromise solution. We should then publish his demands as embodying unreasonable extremism. I mean, if you look at this quote from 1973 and you look at what has happened since then, I mean, it's like this is prophetic. You couldn't make this up. This is totally and utterly prophetic. And from what I can see, Anam, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is that any kind of peace process, and I don't know about the ceasefire, and again, when you say who won the war, I made the point that Israel did not win the war because Al-Qassam brigades and Hamas is there, and winning the war cannot be viewed as destroying people. But I just want to make this point before you come in, is that a peace process is merely a means, or even a ceasefire agreement, for Israel to buy time and to cover or to entrench its occupation or the colonization process until they are accepted as a kind of a fait accompli. And so the only scenario the Israeli state and the Israeli regime will be willing to accept from Palestinians is their total and utter subjugation. They reject all forms of resistance, whether it's armed or non-violent resistance, like the BDS or the Great March of Return in 2018. And their record has basically shown that, they've consistently favored land over peace. They've always favored land over the peace. I mean, look what they've done in Syria now. They've annexed land. They've taken more land of, when was this takeover, the stuff with Jolani? It happened in December. Yeah, November, December. They've taken more land now than it has ever been in that region of the Golan Heights. I mean, it's occupied. That's fully occupied. And it appears to me that land always comes first for them from that particular perspective. I mean, there's a whole range of peace plans that have been, not only in Oslo or the Camp David, the Madrid Peace Conference by George Bush Sr. There was a PLO peace plan after the Intifada commenced, because the first Intifada happened in 87, and there was a PLO peace plan that was put forth in 88. Reagan's peace plan, Rogers' plan. At the end of the day,
and even in the 79 one, part of this giving up the Sinai was supposed to be giving up the settlements, freezing the settlement activity, and eventually arriving at a solution for the other 67 territories. So
my question
Israel's
then,
always
Adam, would
deferring.
be,
Like this game of endless deferral. It's always deferring action on the resolution of the territories.
The point is that
you read me a Ben Gurion quote, so that's the quote. That's the point you were making. But you had a question.
At some level, I think the reality of the situation is that Zionist Israel, and here I use the term generically, the Zionist Israel wants all of the land and nothing else. They want all of the land. And I think, when you see, for example, the suicide bombings. By the way, I just want to raise, because you did in the past streams of suicide bombings. The first suicide bombing, only occurred. I mean, the suicide bombings was never, people, I assumed, and certainly going in school, and we used to fight and argue with our friends. They assumed that suicide bombings was a kind of a jihad. It gave a myth that this is a jihad, but in actual fact, it was a policy that was developed by the Japanese kamikaze, and of course they adopted it. But the very first time it was adopted was only after Baruch Goldstein, shot down those Palestinians at the Hebron Mosque. If you look at the timeline and the time scale, before that, there were no suicide bombings. So you had that period, if I recall clearly, from 95, 96, right up until 2000, when the suicide bombings occurred. Because the belief is that Israel and the United States gave the idea that peace is basically not the situation, and the deliberate strategy is that they wanted to buy time.
Both Goldstein and Hamas. Sorry, briefly. I don't mean to derail your thought. Both Goldstein and Hamas wanted to derail the Oslo talks. That's why they sparked off that wave of attacks.
No, that is correct. Yes, that is true. But the point is, from the perspective of Hamas, the argument is that at that particular point, at that stage, they could see no way out, because this is going to be a significant compromise. Nobody's going to accept a compromise on the basis that your land is still continuously taken. Because effectively, and I've read Rashid Khalidi, and particularly, he's written another book, not the 100-Year History of Palestine, but another book which deals with those peace accords. And his argument was that at the end of the day, they just wanted a superficial kind of state with no police force, no army at all, no kind of military, no armed forces, nothing, just a state that effectively was what Gaza became in 2006 under Hamas, because Hamas was in superficial control and they just left it to itself. And nobody's willing to accept that. So my point at the end of the day is that even now, a two-state solution, it's dead. I mean, you can't have, how are we going to have a two-state solution with about 700,000 settlers on the occupied West Bank? The only way to get through is that, okay, we accept them that they are there. These settlers, they are fanatics, they are religious extremists. But now you have a situation where
Right.
We disband the idea of what is called the West Bank, Judea, Samaria. We disband Gaza. Let there not be any Gaza. Let there not be any Gaza Strip. And we just have one single unitary country, because and
Like under the
everybody
British
moves
mandate.
where they go.
Talk about
That
Tom
would be the
Cruise's
way
book.
forward. But the Israelis will not allow that. They will never allow that, because it'll effectively, over time, you can have a situation like in South Africa. You had to have, it's going to happen, black majority rule comes to power. You can criticize it, and I criticize the ANC government. I've been taken to task over the years. Many times my late friend Rasul Snyman, who was a good friend of mine, a political activist, he was part of the BDS at some point, very critical of the South African government, and we can still be, and we probably will be critical of whatever government is eventually in power. But the point is that is the only inevitability. I can't see any other way out. Have a democracy. You want to say you're the only democracy in the Middle East? Well, then prove it. And I think that, and I mean, I think you can only have a unity government.
I wanted to
have a unity government.
My only thing against that is, they built the settlements knowing that they were going to stay there. So however hard it is to expel 700,000 settlers, it's like that was the game. And so the entire idea is, like you said, I feel like that would be the consequence, that they really do have to disband the Ariel, the universities, everything has to be uprooted, because that was illegal to begin with. So, that's why I'm kind of like a hardliner on the settlements, because, that's the game they were playing, right? Because, you brought up Netanyahu, brother. Like, I'm often fond of bringing up even from Rabin and Ehud Barak. Actually, Ehud Barak accelerated the settlement building. So at the same time,
he did.
At the same time as they're carrying on the most dovest peace negotiations of the Dove Party, they are aggressively hawkish on the settlements. So you're right. I mean, there are, like I said, that's why I brought up the Ali Abu Mena quote, Abu Nima. Sorry, I'm saying his name wrong. Because it's like these are the consequences of the decisions that Israel has been making for 50 years, 60 years. But look, let me give you, you brought up Ben Gurion, and that was very powerful. I wanted to just, germane to what you said about the Oslo Accords. So in 1917, when Chaim Weizmann was negotiating with Lord Balfour, the Balfour Declaration, and Chaim Weizmann got it out of them. And so if you read the text of the Balfour Declaration, it doesn't say state. It says His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment of a Jewish homeland in the mandate of Palestine without prejudice to the non-Jewish majority of people. Right, non-Jewish people. So the thing is, though, they asked Chaim Weizmann later, how come you didn't ask for a state? And he said, because we would not have gotten one. So the only thing he did was he asked for a homeland, and he got a written promise that there'd be a homeland. So anyway, I mean, I respect your position that, I think your answer was smart to say, you can't look at these things in retrospect. And, of course, Oslo would have been better than what we have now.
But there was a quote, though, by Arthur Balfour, because in 1919, I must pull that up somewhere, because sometimes you just don't. There's so many. This topic is so vast. But in 1919, there was a separate memorandum.
Nobody talks about 1919 anymore. But yeah,
1990, and he says we don't propose to go through consulting any of the wishes of the inhabitants. And he says Zionism that's more important than the wishes of 700,000 Arabs. So that was in 1919. Even though he had a kind of a so-called, and I mean a benevolent view of 1970 in 1970. But I mean, I think Balfour was an anti-Semite, by the way. That Balfour was apparently an anti-Semite himself way back in the early 1900s. And I don't know what changed, but I was reading somewhere that something had happened where this was a means of getting rid of Jewish people in England, and certainly part and parcel of Europe. Because,
let me suggest to you something, because it was a very interesting tidbit of history. Chaim Weizmann was a chemist, and he invented a way to make acetone or some kind of petroleum derivative to make it synthetically instead of finding it from like a rubber tree or something. So that helped the British in their war effort, and he gave it to the military for free. And so they were kind of indebted to him. And the British also thought the Jews control the world. So by doing something, by like giving them a favor to this like secretive, monopolistic society, they would be in the good graces of like international Jewry. So it
I
was
think
anti-Semitism.
one could also make the claim, I mean, depending on how you look at it, that the Balfour Declaration, to a certain extent, accelerated anti-Semitism in Europe. Because on the one hand, what they were making the argument, and this is, I think Khalidi makes the point, that superficially, they were recognizing the so-called political rights of the Jewish people to have a Jewish national home. But that was an indirect form and way of saying that British Jews and German Jews and European Jews should basically get out. And now you have a situation where, I mean, a lot of anti-Semites and anti-Semitic individuals, Balfour himself being one, and then apparently later he became a so-called Christian Zionist. But a lot of them use this as a means to say, look, these Jews should basically go and find their own homeland. So whilst it's claiming, so you know, in a kind of a, it's a kind of like an oxymoron, because you have a situation where Zionism, in a way, pairs itself with anti-Semitism, where both kind of ideologies play off against each other for wanting the establishment of the Jewish homeland, but also there's an underlying agenda that these Jews should be removed from the respective countries of where they are originally citizens. And that's why you had a situation that a lot of these terrorist groups in like Ghana had apparently links with the Nazis or the Nazi party. And a lot of leading Zionists in Germany were not targeted by Hitler. It was just it's the Roma and the Gypsies, and of course the poorer Jewish communities that were dealt with and used as pawns in relation to that. And then, of course, shipped off to what would then become Israel. But I mean, already they were running a racket and rampant in terms of their belligerency prior to the advent of the Second World War.
Brother Rizwan, did you want to say something?
Is someone on?
Yeah, he joined us.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Pretty much the old justification about God gave us our land and all, I think is my biggest objection to this matter. Turning God to a real estate agent or realtor, I just don't think it's proper, especially the politician in Israel that actually make those cases. And you can't say God gave you a land and you ask them, do you believe in God? And they say they don't believe in God, which is a huge, contradiction to me. Or, Anam, I don't know if you think, do you agree with those arguments they make? When they make those arguments that God gave us some land, do you agree with those, arguments?
For example, Brother Yusuf was bringing up Smotrich and the other Ben Gavir. Those people believe that West Bank and Gaza are part of Israel because King David was born in Bethlehem and so on. So no, I don't agree with that argument. But as long as we're on the subject, brother, Quran says that God told them to dwell in the land. So in a sense, we do believe God told them to live in that land, and so I would say they have a right to live there in that sense as well. But I'm not saying I'm not saying nobody else has the right to live there and the occupation should go on. But I think, how would you respond to that, brother? Would you agree?
Yeah, look, I'll tell you, Ridwan, and just because he's asked the question to both of us. Firstly, yeah, look, we've discussed the Quranic verse. Okay, firstly, there's 2 points one can make, and the one point is that the ancient Israelites. Firstly, let's look at from not only the Quranic perspective, from the biblical perspective. The Bible is more clear. There is authority that in I think Genesis 17 verse 8, God promised the land of Israel to the Jews. He says, "I'll give unto thee and to thy seed after thee all the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." Now, it's claimed that God spoke those words to Abraham about 4 millennia ago. But, there's a number of arguments that can be made against. Number one, the Bible is not a title deed, right?
Yes, brother. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt your flow, but briefly, though, that verse is actually promised to Abraham's children. So include Ismail al-Islam. So in other words, I view
one could make that argument,
my heritage as well.
No, indeed, I agree. I agree with that. I agree with that particular point.
We keep the circumcision and Christians don't. So, I feel, and Genesis says that this will be a forever lasting covenant. So Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm attached to this covenant, by the way, so I wouldn't.
No, no, no.
Anyway, you're saying it's not a
I
deed.
want to deal with that because the late Ahmed Deedat wrote a book on this particular topic. I don't know if you've ever seen it, called Arabs and Ahmed Deedat. He wrote a book called Arabs in Israel.
Yeah, we grew up with him.
Conflict and Reconciliation on this land. He claimed that this particular title deed or this promise was invalidated much later, where Abraham died not having seen the promises or the gifts, and his sons buried him, and God gave him no land not to set even his foot upon that particular land. But that's another point. But here's the argument that I've got in relation to this. Number one, we could argue that both the Bible and, for that matter, by extension, although the Quran has nothing explicit in relation to that, are not title deeds. So in a modern day society, no court of law or world body would honor as legal a title ownership that purported to come from God. That's the first point. The second point is that there have been claims of support, divine support, pagan support for tribal, national, ethnic ambitions. That was very common in the ancient world. So you had, for example, the ancient Greeks and the Romans. They all cited people, and I don't know this until quite recently, they all cited, if you look at some of the books, even the Sumerians, if you look at the Sumerian tablets and the translations done by Zechariah Sitchin, they cite divine inspiration for their particular conquest. So some now claim, and I understand, and I'm broadened it, but the Jews or the Israelis, and even those non-religious Israelis, would claim that the land of Israel was promised to the descendants of Isaac by God through Abraham. First question is, are the present-day Israelis occupying Israel the descendants of Abraham? Because for Israel to survive, it has to continuously redefine what it means in its definition, who is a Jew. Because if you look at the current definition is very fluid and has been essentially developed this mantra to essentially suit a particular agenda. If you look at many Israeli historians, and I think there is what's his name? I must get the guy's book. Anam, do you know the book? The individual who wrote the book, The Invention of the Jewish People? Shlomo Sand. Get the book by Shlomo Sand, an Israeli historian. He wrote a book called The Invention of the Jewish People, and he makes the point when discussing the political setup that the definition of a Jew has become so fluid and so contaminated that it makes no sense to talk about a modern day Israeli as having kind of any systematic relationship with the ancient Israelites. People assume that the ancient Israelites or that the modern day Jews are the descendants of the ancient Israelites. I mean, half of the individuals who immigrated to Israel in the past 20th century were Russians, belonging to mothers who had essentially very late converted to Judaism. These are Russians. You have Polish. Ariel Sharon, for example, was Polish for that particular man. Netanyahu is European. So if you want to make the argument that, look, God gave us this particular land, and for a long time, the idea of who are Jewish has always not just simply been religious, but has also been ethnic. The Israelites were a particular group of a specific ethnic stock, a tribe, and that ethnic stock does not exist today. You cannot, for the life of me, I mean, people archaeologically can't, that's why scientists and archaeologists say you can't even prove the existence that there was a person like Moses or Abraham that existed. I mean, it's just beyond your historical imagination. We believe in them, of course, from the perspective of a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian, but archaeologically, you cannot prove it. So if you want to make the argument from a perspective that, look, the ancient Israelites had a particular promise, then that is debunked by the fact that from an ethnic point of view, these individuals who have appropriated the title Jew, some of them secular, some are religious,
we know King David existed historically.
I beg your pardon?
I'm not defending the hills of Judea and Samaria. I call it the West Bank in Gaza. Okay, it's not. There's no reason to rename it. But we know King David existed. You're right. Moses did not exist, and we don't have the historical record of that. Of course, like you said, we believe in it as Muslims.
I don't know. I don't know if archaeologically can be proven that King David existed. I'll have to study that. But I'm not so sure we can because I mean that period, I don't know what archaeological evidence say. Look, just to make clear, because there are people out there that may get confused with us. I'm not denying the existence of Dawood or David and Musa and Moses and Abraham or Ibrahim. This is our belief. But archaeologically, we cannot prove their existence. I don't even think archaeologically we can prove the Exodus occurred. I don't think we can archaeologically prove the Exodus.
We can't even figure out the date. What date is that supposed to be?
We don't know. We don't know. We just simply do not know.
So, the pharaohs don't line up. Whatever pharaoh you pick, the dynasty of the
they don't line. This is precisely the point. We don't even know which pharaoh we're talking about. Which was it? Merneptah? Was it Ramses II?
Yeah,
we don't know.
For fiction, we say Ramses II, but that's a good as guess as anybody.
It's a guess. So my point is that even from a theological point of view, if the claim is that God gave the land to the Israelites, there is no way you can prove that claim anachronistically today and then somehow the other retrospectively apply to the modern day Israelis, many of whom are Europeans and Russians. I mean, centuries back, if you go back to the Russian Jews who the Israelis now, who, if you trace their ancestry, were Russian, centuries before that, they were not Jewish. They even never followed the Jewish religion. They were probably Eastern Orthodox or whatever religion existed in Russia during the time of the various czars that took place. So these people ethnically have absolutely no relationship with the ancient Israelites, who cannot be archaeologically proved. But from a religious point of view, even if we were to make that particular claim, let's assume hypothetically that you were to make that particular claim, that look, somehow or the other, by hook or by crook, yes, these are the descendants of the ancient Israelites. We've had, and I think, Alan, you've probably seen, we've had, for example, Rabbi David Feldman, and we've had Rabbi Weiss, two good friends of mine from the Orthodox Jewish Neturei Karta, and their view is, and they make the point that the founding of a Zionist state is in direct contradiction to the teachings of the Torah, which forbid the establishment of a Jewish state, and in fact commands Jews to remain in exile until being released from that exile by God himself. And they, of course, are waiting the second coming for that to basically happening. And then at that time, all the nations of the world will live together in peace. So from a religious point of view, there are Orthodox Jews here that reject that particular position. The traditional Orthodox position from 2,000 years ago was that Jews can only return to Zion when the Messiah arrives to reveal, the glory of Hashem to the entire world. Orthodox Judaism opposes Zionism. It opposes Zionism.
Let me agree and exposit a little bit. When you look at, so after God gives them the land in their own books, in Jeremiah and Amos, it says that if you are not true to me, the one true God, I will expel you from the land. I will take out all the fruits and the honey and take you up in the land of milk and honey, and you will be in exile. And that's why, like you said, the theology, and the fun fact is, before the creation of Israel, at the time of 1948, if you ask most American Jews, should we create a state of Israel, they would have said no, because religiously there's no imperative to go and create a Jewish state over there, because they are in religious exile. They are under punishment, God's divine punishment, and they cannot return until that punishment is lifted. So yeah.
And so the last point I want to make also is that the existing borders of this land haven't been defined, because if you look at the biblical narrative in the book of Genesis, and those who are familiar, go to the book of Genesis. It talks about a land being promised to Abraham, to his descendants, however you want to define them. It actually borders the area between the River Nile in Egypt right to the Euphrates River in Iraq, in what is now modern-day Iraq, which was then would have been ancient Babylon. Well, I think at the Genesis time, Babylon was just basically what they call the Tower of Babel, and then, of course, you've got Babylon. But it'll be the Nile to the Euphrates River. Now, does that imply that if you were to say God gave it to you and you follow it through, does that imply that the future borders should and idealistically span the borders of Jordan, Syria, which they've now done part of the borders, Lebanon, Egypt, southern Turkey? And could that also explain why Israel hasn't got a defined border? And could that also justify or explain why Israel has annexed and occupied neighboring states? So I think that's a very weak argument to make the point that God gave them the land. I mean, it's a stupid argument. Firstly, I mean, if you want to go into that particular theological discussion, we can. And even from a theological point of view, we can show that the prophecy was invalidated because the book of Deuteronomy, I think 18 verse 19 says that, how shall we know if a prophecy comes to pass, if the prophecy is true or false? And then we are told that if the prophet spoke it presumptuously, then you will know that that prophecy was not a true prophecy. You should not follow him. So here you have a situation that even though a promise was made to Abraham, did God fulfill the promise? Because the promise is not just to his descendants, it's to Abraham and his descendants. And I think there's a chapter and I'm just going to leave it on this particular point, but there's a verse in the Bible, Acts, I think it's Acts 7 verse 5. Where are we? Acts chapter 7 verse 5.
That's the New Testament, by the way.
Yeah, that's the New Testament, but in reference to the Old Testament, because you sometimes have passages which either they anachronistically go back or not. So here's a Google. This is from AI. Yes, Acts 7:5. In Acts 7:5, in reference to Abraham, it says he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot of ground, but promised to give it to him as a possession and his descendants after him, even though he had no child. So you have a situation here that, on the one hand, as in Genesis, God basically makes a promise. God makes a promise to Abraham to give him land. And then that promise or that prophecy that he makes is not fulfilled. So if the prophecy is not fulfilled by him giving him no inheritance, not even 1 square foot of land, despite God having made a promise, that would mean it's an unfulfilled prophecy. And when a prophet makes a prophecy or relays a prophecy that it is essentially unfulfilled, then basically it's an unfulfilled prophecy. And how can you then use an unfulfilled prophecy to make the argument for the fact that this is indeed God who gave you that particular land? So there's different ways to look at it. But I won't waste my time going into the theological point of view. I assume if you are having a discussion with a Christian missionary, this is probably a Zionist. This is probably something that is used in missionary tautology, and they may make this point, and you could probably use it. And I think Ahmed Didat did a fairly good job. He wrote a book called Arabs in Israel, Conflict and Conciliation, and then he had a phenomenal symposium. And I'm talking, this is probably 89. I was very, very young then, probably just early primary school. But in 89, he had a discussion with Paul Findlay.
He's from South Africa, so he's your compatriot.
Yeah, he is. I've never met him personally. I mean, I think I did whilst he was, but he was already ill at that stage. But he had a discussion with the U.S. Congressman Paul Findlay, and the topic was in 89 called "Is Israel Set Up for Destruction?" And he discusses it at length. I urge viewers to watch that if they have the time, and in fact to get a copy of the book Arabs and Israel, Conflict or Conciliation. I think it's available online.
So personally, the way I actually deal with these crazy claims sometimes is I just tell them to give me the key to their house. And I tell them in the book I believe in, it states their house belongs to me. They go like, wow, that makes no sense. So that's exactly what I do to them. So I go like, the same way you're telling me that is the same way you feel when I tell you, God give me your house. Or I tell you, God give me your house. Exactly. So that's what I tell them. That's exactly how I debunk this argument. It's just a very weak argument. And to worsen the whole situation, like Ilian Papi said, most Zionists don't believe in God, but they believe God gave them a land. It's just ridiculous at this point. Yeah, and I don't think you really address that issue. That they don't believe in God, most of them, but they also believe God gave him a land. You didn't address that aspect.
Yeah, that is. See, I had brought this up when I first joined the Kofafi channel past 5 podcasts ago on this Israel subject. So there is a split in Israeli society. It's actually a schizophrenic society. You have basically, you can think of it as Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And to really simplify, Tel Aviv is liberal. You have women wearing whatever they want at the beaches, and pride parades and everything. And Jerusalem is ultra religious. That is where they cannot give up 1 inch of Jerusalem. If they give up 1 inch of Jerusalem, somehow, like, that's an affront to God. Or I don't even know, like, if God tells you you have to keep this land, there's no amount of money, there's no amount of pressure or asking politely that can convince somebody, because it is now a theological claim. So this country is schizophrenic. This country is divided. And, the main wound before October 7th was launched, Israel was undergoing a judicial crisis because the judiciary was trying to check Netanyahu from passing his right-wing religious agenda. And the judiciary is liberal. And then the other thing is that what they want is the thing is that the Orthodox, they don't serve in the military. So it's the liberal kids that serve in the military, and their kids die in Gaza, and the Orthodox are voting for the war hawk policies, which involve invading Gaza and invading the West Bank and occupying Lebanon and things like that. So this is the extreme fissures within Israeli society that, if we try to look at paint these people with one broad brushstroke, with all due respect to you, brother Yusuf, that it's just a satanic society as a whole. There is a good segment of society that's willing to sit down and be reasonable. And unfortunately, I think you said the gangsters in charge. I'll just say the nut jobs are in charge.
Yeah, indeed, that is certainly the case. We're going to bring the stream to an end, brother. Thank you, Ridwan, for that, Jazakallah for that, and brother Anam. But it's going past 10 from my particular side. I wish I could be longer here, but I have to get ready for work. I think at the end of the day, what people need to know is that there's a 3-phase deal at this particular place. Peter Beaumont from the Guardian did an excellent article on this. I urge people to read this. And he's raising the question whether this Israel-Hamas agreement will in fact hold, because it's highly vulnerable. There's little trust between the parties, very little trust. And whilst it's true on the one hand that all negotiations, in a general sense, basically rely on trust building, and people need to essentially get back together. The reality of the situation is that the Palestinian people, the Palestinian civilians, the Palestinian women have had their lives destroyed. They've literally had their lives destroyed. So whilst on the one hand, I see that the ceasefire agreement is reflective of the fact that Israel has lost the war. And I believe that they have lost the war. And why I say that they've lost the war, because killing and decimating an entire population is not victory. Hamas is still in power. The Al-Qassam brigades were proudly on the particular street. And now they're forced to negotiate with them, whereas a few months ago they were saying they will never. Netanyahu and Gallant and all of them, and even people like the former IDF spokesperson Jonathan Conricus was saying, and which he did say. I think there was a discussion on Piers Morgan last week with Miriam Francois that, and she was abused by Piers quite badly, but he made the point that this is not a good deal. So he can only say that because of the fact that from the perspective of the Israelis, they never achieved what they wanted to achieve. I mean, what have they achieved of substance? They may get few of the hostages back. A lot of them have been dead. They've been killed. They've destroyed the entire Gaza. It's been estimated that it may take something like up to 80 to 90 years, 80 to 90 years to reconstruct Gaza. There's a 3-phase nature of this agreement. We don't know what the outcome is. We really cannot know what the outcome is. Basically, what Hamas's position is also this: that they've given statements. I think it was Abu Ubaidah or somebody, I think on one of the Arabic channels of Al Jazeera, they made the point that they are concerned that Israel will seek to secure the return of the most vulnerable hostages, the women and the children, and then they will continue commencing fighting. Perhaps at the time of the second phase, they'll continue the attacks. Because when the ceasefire deal was announced on January 15th, they still kill people a couple of days after. So what ceasefire are we talking about? And if you look at the quote by Smotrich on X, he's basically claimed essentially that Netanyahu has assured him that the war will continue. So at the end of the day, whilst the ceasefire is reflective of the fact that Israel has not achieved anything other than just total and utter destruction and bloodshed, which is not any win for any party. In fact, they've lost their moral high ground. My concern is that after they get a few of the hostages back, they may, something could happen and they could then continue and essentially engage in their total destruction, continuous genocide against the Gazan population, which is now expanding and increasing to the West Bank. I mean, how many people have been killed since October 7th on the West Bank? Close to 1,000. Close to 1,000. So Hamas is in Gaza. The Al-Qassam brigades are operational. They've got armors. Gaza has been totally decimated. The population has been totally brutally destroyed. So by its own kind of cynical metric, they haven't actually achieved what they wanted to achieve. And now, of course, they've become a pariah to the entire world. The entire world will now basically associate Israel with genocide. So whilst we've asked the question of who really won the war, that's what was put in by my good brother Muhammad. I won't call this a war because a war is symmetrical. This was not symmetrical warfare. This is asymmetrical. You can't call this a war. This is a genocide. So the title is, goes who actually won the war. This is actually a genocide. Hamas was not a state actor. It's a non-state actor. You can't compare Hamas with the IDF. There's no comparison between the two. But yet, despite them being a non-state actor, and despite more than a year of total destruction, they haven't failed. They've failed in getting rid of Hamas. Hamas is there. They've recruited more people. And this is what happens. You see, the more you torture, the more you oppress, the more you kill and slaughter. If my family, and I go with my family, and let's assume hypothetically, I would be with my family, and I'm walking out, and tomorrow the entire house is blown up, and my whole family and baby and child and wife are killed. Would I join Hamas? Of course I would. Of course I would join any resistance. I'll join either Islamic Jihad, which is not as effective as Hamas, or the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I would join any resistance movement. And that's essentially what has happened. Israel's actions have been a recruitment ground for Hamas. They've recruited more people. I mean, the argument is always posed that, didn't Hamas expect that this is what Israel would do if they were to invade on October 7th? But here's the whole point. Number one, you're making the claim that Israel's got no moral agency. And number two, well, from that perspective, can you not make the counter argument that wouldn't Israel have known that in destroying Gaza, in their perceived claim of wanting to destroy Hamas, there would be more recruitments for Hamas? I mean, so the arguments just simply don't hold up at all whatsoever. So this is basically the situation. Brother Anam, I don't know if you're still here, and some of the other brothers, Ridwan, but thank you, welcome. We are going to basically continue this program in the future. We will be continuously talking about Gaza. Both myself and Brother Muhammad, he's in the background today, will be relentless in our discussions, in our engagements. We always want to confront the anti-Israel propaganda. We want you to share these streams. Share the streams with as many people as possible. Share it with your friends. Share it with your neighbors. Share it on social media. My Facebook account has been locked out. I haven't been able to access it now for 2 months. I think Brother Muhammad has had the same thing with his account. His a YouTube channel has been shadow banned. I've created a Patreon account for those who want to contribute. I think you go to patreon.com/South African Debate Initiative. It's still at its infancy stage. I want to increase the camera, and of course we want to have kind of far more professional setups, at least from my perspective here, and get a few equipment. So support us, or at least subscribe to us, subscribe to my channel, the South African Debate Initiative, Brother Ridwan, and subscribe to the Coventry Faith Foundation in the United Kingdom, and share this with as many people as possible. So thank you, and greetings of peace to everybody out there and yourself, Brother Ridwan. Muhammad, anything you want to say from your side? Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum. Brother Muhammad, are you there?